who knew the gilded halls of medieval castles, hid such dark secrets? What if the most loyal confidants of queens were caught in webs of ambition, forbidden love, and outright treason? From the 12th to the 15th century, the lives of ladies-in-waiting were far from quiet, often entangled in dramas that rocked kingdom. Number 12. The scandalous retinue of Eleanor of Aquitaine on the Second Crusade. The year was 1147. A vast army led by King Louis VII of France and his young wife, the dynamic Eleanor of Aquitaine, set out for the Holy Land on the Second Crusade. Eleanor, Queen of France, traveled not just with knights and soldiers, but with a magnificent retinue of her own, a large company of ladies in waiting, attendants, and servants. These women were not just for companionship, they were a visible display of Eleanor's immense wealth and status. However, the long and arduous journey, stretching from Paris to Constantinople and then across Anatolia, soon began to fray the rigid social fabric expected of such an expedition. The initial enthusiasm for the holy mission gave way to hardship. Supplies dwindled, the weather turned harsh, and the journey became a test of endurance. It was during this period of extreme stress and close quarters that whispers began to spread among the Crusader camps. Chroniclers of the time, such as Odo of Dea, who accompanied the expedition, recorded a growing sense of disquiet and accusation regarding the behavior of Eleanor's ladies. The traditional strictures of courtly behavior seemed to loosen in the harsh realities of campaigning. The rumors suggested that many of the ladies, cooped up in tents or traveling alongside the army, were engaged in improprieties. Some accounts spoke of the women dressing in outlandish attire, not suited for the rigors of travel or the piety expected of a crusader. More damning were the widespread murmurs of scandalous romantic entanglements and illicit affairs. These whispers targeted not just the lesser-known ladies, but also the more prominent members of Eleanor's personal household. The chroniclers painted a picture of a retinue that was more interested in pleasure than pilgrimage. The king, Louis VII, a man of profound piety, was reportedly deeply disturbed by these reports. He himself was known for his ascetic nature and dedication to religious observance. Contrast between his own rigorous conduct and the perceived laxity among his wife's ladies-in-waiting caused significant tension within the royal couple's already strained relationship. Louis viewed the journey as a sacred undertaking, and the alleged behavior of the ladies was seen as a moral blight on the entire crusading enterprise. The accusations were not specific to one individual lady-in-waiting, but rather encompassed the entire contingent. It was the collective perception of their conduct that became this scandal. They were seen as a distraction, a source of temptation, and a drain on resources. The long marches, the dangers, and the constant exposure to a harsh environment seemingly broke down conventional boundaries. The women who had left the comforts of French castles found themselves in circumstances that tested their decorum. The scandal reached a peak during the difficult crossing of Anatolia, where the Crusader army suffered heavy losses. The morale was low, and scapegoats were sought. Queen's luxurious baggage train and her seemingly carefree ladies became targets for criticism. Their presence was blamed for slowing down the army and for encouraging a general loosening of morals. The whispers became louder, turning into open complaints and accusations against the Queen and her entourage. Upon reaching Antioch, the scandal intensified. Raymond of Poitiers, Eleanor's uncle and a ruler of Antioch, reportedly engaged in a relationship with the Queen that was viewed with suspicion by her husband Louis. While not directly involving the ladies-in-waiting in an affair, their presence and their alleged loose morals provided a backdrop that fueled Louis's jealousy and distrust. The perception of Eleanor's court as morally compromised extended to her entire female household. Consequences of this perceived scandal were far-reaching. The Second Crusade ultimately failed, and the widespread belief in the moral failings of the French contingent, particularly the Queen's ladies, contributed to the narrative of divine displeasure. Louis VII's marriage to Eleanor, already fragile, crumbled further. The accusations of impropriety among her ladies became another point of contention in their eventual annulment. Eleanor's spirited independence, coupled with the scandals surrounding her retinue, painted a picture that was considered unfitting for a pious Queen of France. The ladies, though nameless in many of the surviving accounts, were inextricably linked to the Queen's reputation and the perceived failure of the Grand Crusade itself. Number 11. Jeanne de Joinville's accusations at Eleanor of Castile's court. In the late 13th century, England was ruled by Edward I, a king known for his imposing stature and his strong sense of justice. Beside him stood his beloved queen, Eleanor of Castile, a woman renowned for her intelligence, piety, and considerable influence. Her court was a center of culture and politics populated by ladies from both England and Castile. Among them was Jeanne de Joinville, a lady-in-waiting to the Queen whose life would become entangled in a web of public accusations. Jeanne de Joinville came from a prominent French family known for their loyalty and service to the crown. Her father, Jeanne de Joinville, was a renowned chronicler and close confidant of King Louis IX of France. Jeanne's position at the English court serving Eleanor of Castile reflected the close ties between the English and French monarchies at the time. She was expected to embody the highest standards of aristocratic conduct, serving as a companion and aid to the Queen. However, the political landscape of the late 13th century was treacherous, marked by frequent tensions between England and France, and by internal disputes within both kingdoms. Accusations of impropriety were often used as political weapons aimed at discrediting individuals close to power or undermining royal authority. It was in this charged atmosphere that whispers began to circulate about Jeanne de Joinville. Specific details regarding the nature of the accusations against Jeanne de Joinville are somewhat elusive in contemporary chronicles, often appearing as veiled references or part of broader criticisms. However, surviving papal letters and royal correspondence indicate that she was indeed the subject of various charges. These allegations, which were taken seriously enough to be formally investigated, generally revolved around accusations of misconduct or impropriety. They hinted at behavior deemed unfitting for a lady of her standing, particularly one serving in the intimate household of the Queen. The accusation suggested a breach of courtly decorum or involvement in activities that brought disrepute to the Queen's court. While the exact nature of the alleged acts remained somewhat obscured by the passage of time, the fact that such charges were levied against a member of the Queen's inner circle indicates a significance. It was a challenge to the moral integrity of the royal household itself. The accusers, likely motivated by political rivalry or personal animosity, sought to tarnish the reputation of Eleanor of Castile's court by targeting one of her trusted ladies. The investigation into these accusations would have been a tense affair. A lady-in-waiting was not merely a servant, she was a reflection of the Queen's judgment in the honor of the court. Any perceived failing on her part could be interpreted as a wider weakness in the royal family's moral standing. The pressure on Jeanne de Joinville would have been immense, as her personal reputation, and by extension that of her family, hung in the balance. The outcome of these accusations is not definitively recorded in every detail. However, it appears that Jeanne de Joinville managed to navigate the storm. The lack of severe punishment or a definitive public condemnation suggests that either the accusations were not fully substantiated or that royal intervention protected her. Nonetheless, the very existence of such public charges against a lady-in-waiting highlights the precarious position of women in medieval court. Their proximity to power made them both privileged and vulnerable. The scandal surrounding Jeanne de Joinville served as a reminder of the constant scrutiny faced by those in royal service. Even without a clear record of conviction or detailed proof, the mere act of accusation could cast a long shadow. It illustrates how personal reputations could be manipulated for political gain, and how the private lives of court members were often public fodder in the tightly controlled yet gossip-ridden world of medieval royalty. For Eleanor of Castile, a queen who valued her reputation and her court's honor, such an incident, however resolved, would have been a source of considerable concern. Number 10. Lady Anne Hastings' affair with Edward IV. The English court in the late 15th century was a place of shifting loyalties and scandalous whispers, especially under the reign of the monarch King Edward IV. He was a king known for his charm, his military prowess, and his considerable appetite for women. His marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner, had already caused a stir, and his affections often wandered beyond the confines of his marital bed. One of the ladies, caught in the orbit of his dangerous charm, was Lady Anne Hastings, née Hungerford. Lady Anne Hungerford was a member of a distinguished family, and by marriage became Lady Anne Hastings. She was a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth Woodville, a position that placed her in the intimate circles of royal power. Ladies-in-waiting were not just companions. They were often confidants, messengers, and part of the Queen's most trusted household. This proximity to the Queen and King, however, could also be a perilous path. It was no secret that Edward IV had a string of mistresses despite his marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. These affairs were often conducted discreetly, but word inevitably spread through the tight-knit court. Lady Anne Hastings, known for her beauty and wit, reportedly caught the king's eye. What began as royal favor is said to have blossomed into a passionate affair. The relationship between a king and a married lady-in-waiting was a significant scandal in itself. Such an affair, if widely known, challenged the queen's authority and dignity, and also brought shame upon the lady's husband and family. Court was a hotbed of gossip and observation, and it would have been difficult to keep such a high-profile liaison entirely secret. Chroniclers of the period, while often cautious in their explicit descriptions of royal indiscretions, hinted at the king's numerous dalliances, and Lady Anne Hastings was one of the prominent figures whispered about the affair. Placed Lady Anne in a perilous position while she gained the king's favor and perhaps some material benefits. She also risked the wrath of the Queen, the condemnation of society, and the potential ruin of her family's reputation. The consequences for a woman caught in such a scandal could range from ostracization to severe punishment depending on the political climate and the power of those involved. After Edward IV's sudden death in 1483, the political landscape of England plunged into chaos. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, soon to become Richard III, usurped the throne, declaring Edward IV's children illegitimate. His justification for this dramatic move included the claim that Edward IV had entered into a pre-contract of marriage with another woman, Eleanor Talbot, before marrying Elizabeth Woodville, rendering his subsequent marriage invalid. In the turbulent aftermath of Edward IV's death and Richard III's usurpation, those associated with the former king's court, particularly his lovers, became vulnerable. Lady Anne Hastings, having been so closely linked to Edward, found herself in a precarious position. She was caught up in the purges and accusations that followed the change of power. Her relationship with the deceased king made her an easy target for those seeking to dismantle the old court and consolidate new power. The scandals surrounding Lady Anne Hastings was not just about infidelity. It was woven into the larger tapestry of the Wars of the Roses and the legitimacy crisis of the English throne. Her association with Edward IV, and specifically their alleged affair, became a part of the broader narrative used by Richard III to discredit the previous regime. While she was not accused of treason in the way some others were, her reputation was tarnished, and she likely faced a period of intense scrutiny and social disgrace. The fate of her wealth and influence, so tied to the king's favor, would have been drastically altered. Lady Anne Hastings' story is a stark reminder of how personal relationships at the highest levels of power could have devastating public and private consequences in the volatile world of medieval English royalty. Number 9. Lady Isabella Buchan and the Scottish coronation. The early 14th century in Scotland was a time of fierce struggle for independence against English domination. In this tumultuous period, loyalties were tested, and acts of defiance could have monumental consequences. One such act, both courageous and scandalous, involved Lady Isabella Buchan, Countess of Buchan, a lady-in-waiting to Elizabeth de Burgh, Queen of Scots, wife of Robert the Bruce. Lady Isabella Buchan hailed from the powerful Macduff family, a lineage that held the hereditary right to crown the Scottish kings at Scone. Scone was the ancient site where Scottish monarchs were traditionally inaugurated, a ceremony seen as crucial for the legitimacy of any ruler. This rite was not just ceremonial. It was a powerful symbol of clan authority and tradition. In 1306, Robert the Bruce, having recently killed his rival John Comyn, dramatically declared himself King of Scots. However, the traditional coronation stone, the Stone of Scone, had been seized by Edward I of England in 1296 and taken to Westminster Abbey. Furthermore, Isabella's brother, the Earl of Fife, who held the hereditary right to perform the coronation, was siding with the English. This created a profound dilemma for Bruce's claim to the throne. At this critical juncture, Lady Isabella Buchan, despite her brother's allegiance and her own position as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth de Burgh, made a bold and defiant move. She rode swiftly to Scone, asserting her family's ancient right to perform the coronation. In a powerful display of support for Robert the Bruce and Scottish independence, she crowned him King of Scots. This act was both a tremendous boost to Bruce's legitimacy and a direct affront to English authority. However, Isabella's courageous act came with a terrible price. Her actions were seen by Edward I of England as an act of treason and a grave challenge to his claim of overlordship in Scotland. Edward, often called Hammer of the Scots, was known for his ruthless suppression of Scottish resistance. He was furious at Isabella's audacity. The English forces soon swept across Scotland, capturing many of Bruce's supporters, including Isabella. Her capture was deemed a significant victory for the English, and Edward I was determined to make an example of her. He ordered a punishment that was exceptionally cruel and unusual, designed to humiliate and break her spirit, and to deter any others from similar acts of defiance. Isabella was imprisoned in a cage made of wood and iron, constructed in the shape of a crown. This cage was then hung from the walls of Berwick Castle, a prominent English stronghold on the Scottish border. There, exposed to the elements and public view, she was left to endure the harsh conditions. She was allowed only minimal shelter and food, and her ordeal became a public spectacle, a chilling warning to anyone who dared to challenge English rule. This imprisonment, especially in such a degrading and public manner, was a profound scandal. It was an act of extreme cruelty, particularly against a noblewoman. The conditions of her confinement were scandalous, not just for their brutality, but also for the deliberate humiliation they inflicted. The cage became a symbol of English tyranny and Scottish defiance. Lady Isabella remained imprisoned in this manner for approximately 4 years, before being transferred to a monastery where she was confined more conventionally for several more years. Her act of crowning Robert the Bruce, a moment of profound national importance for the Scots, led to her enduring a fate that shocked even many in the brutal world of medieval warfare. Her story became a legend, a testament to her loyalty and bravery, but also a stark reminder of the savage consequences for those who dared to defy a powerful monarch. For the Scottish court, her suffering was a poignant and enduring scandal, a scar left by the conflict for their very nation's existence. Number 8. Catherine de la Pole and Catherine of Valois' secret marriage. The mid-15th century in England saw a young Queen Catherine of Valois, widow of the heroic Henry V, and mother of the infant Henry VI. As a dowager queen, her position was unique and somewhat precarious. She was still a royal figure, but also a young widow with a life ahead of her. The statute law of the time forbade a queen dowager from remarrying without the king's, her sons, consent, a provision designed to prevent politically inconvenient alliances and maintain royal control over the royal line. Catherine of Valois, however, fell deeply in love with Owen Tudor, a Welsh squire who served in her household. Their relationship began in secret, and their subsequent marriage, though not officially recognized until years later, was a profound scandal waiting to be revealed. Ladies-in-waiting were crucial in such clandestine affairs, acting as confidants, messengers, and sometimes even as facilitators. Among those privy to the Queen's secret was Katherine de la Pole. Katherine de la Pole was a lady-in-waiting in Queen Catherine's household, a position that granted her intimate access to the Queen's private life. In the close-knit world of a royal court, trust was paramount, especially when affairs of the heart, particularly forbidden ones, were involved. It is believed that Katherine de la Pole played a significant role in assisting the Queen in her secret relationship with Owen Tudor. She would have been aware of the romance and likely helped to facilitate meetings, convey messages, and generally keep the secret from the prying eyes of the court and the powerful council that governed in the young King Henry VI's name. The very notion of the Dowager Queen secretly marrying a mere squire was a scandalous one. It was a breach of royal protocol, a challenge to the authority of the realm, and potentially jeopardized the royal succession. Council, fearing any dilution of royal blood or complications with the regency, would have been horrified by such a union. The implications for the Queen's honor and the stability of the kingdom were immense. As the Queen's lady-in-waiting, Katherine de la Pole's involvement would have made her an accomplice in this forbidden union. She would have been a witness, a confidant, and a keeper of a secret that could shake the very foundations of the English government. The risk she ran was considerable. Discovery could lead to charges of treason, imprisonment, or even execution. The stakes were incredibly high for everyone involved. The secret marriage between Catherine of Valois and Owen Tudor eventually came to light, though the exact timeline and manner of its revelation are debated by historians. It is believed that the Queen had several children with Owen Tudor, including Edmund Tudor, who would later become the father of King Henry VII. The existence of these children made the marriage impossible to keep hidden indefinitely. When the marriage was finally revealed, it caused considerable outrage among the English nobility and the royal council. Owen Tudor was imprisoned on several occasions, though he consistently managed to escape or be released. Queen herself faced censure and was largely confined to Bermondsey Abbey for the remainder of her life, where she died in 1437. Katherine de la Pole, as one of the key figures who aided the Queen, would have undoubtedly faced scrutiny and repercussions. While specific details of her punishment or fate are not as well documented as those of the Queen or Owen Tudor, her involvement in such a monumental secret would have marked her. She would have been seen as complicit in a scandal that challenged royal authority. Her reputation would have been irrevocably linked to the Queen's defiance and the subsequent struggle to legitimize the Tudor line. The scandal of Catherine of Valois' marriage, facilitated in part by her trusted ladies like Katherine de la Pole, remained a delicate and hushed matter for decades, shaping the early history of the Tudor dynasty itself. Number 7. Helie of Saint-Saens' elopement from Constance of Brittany's court. The late 12th century was a turbulent time in the Plantagenet Empire, with powerful figures like Richard the Lionheart and King John vying for control. Amidst these struggles, the court of Constance, Duchess of Brittany and Countess of Richmond, was a place of political maneuvering and personal drama. Constance was a significant figure, mother of Arthur I, Duke of Brittany, who was a rival to John for the English throne. In this environment, the movements and relationships of her ladies-in-waiting could carry considerable weight. One such lady was Helie of Saint-Saens, a woman of noble birth who served in Constance's household. Her position placed her in close proximity to the Duchess, making her a witness to the daily life and political machinations of the Breton court. Ladies-in-waiting were expected to embody decorum and loyalty, reflecting the honor of the household they served. However, Helie's story took an unexpected turn that became a notable scandal of the time. Helie of Saint-Saens became involved with Fulk Fitzwarren, a young nobleman known for his adventurous spirit and occasional defiance of royal authority. Fulk Fitzwarren was a Marcher lord, whose family had a history of disputes with the English crown, particularly with King John. He was a figure often associated with rebellion and independent action. The relationship between Helie and Fulk appears to have developed in secret. Their romance culminated in a dramatic act. Helie eloped with Fulk Fitzwarren. Elopement, particularly for a noblewoman serving in a duchess's court, was a significant scandal in medieval society. It bypassed the formal arrangements of marriage, which were typically meticulously negotiated by families for political and economic advantage. Such an act was seen as a grave breach of social order and potentially an insult to the noble household, from which the lady fled. For Constance of Brittany, the elopement of one of her ladies-in-waiting would have been a source of considerable embarrassment and anger. It reflected poorly on her court's ability to maintain order and control over its members. Furthermore, given Fulk Fitzwarren's contentious relationship with King John, any association between her court and a known rebel could have political repercussions for Constance, who herself was often in conflict with King John. The elopement was not merely a private affair. It became a part of the larger narrative of Fulk Fitzwarren's life, which is detailed in the semi-fictional, yet historically based, Fulk Fitzwarren romance. This chronicle recounts Fulk's adventurous life, his disputes with King John, and his romantic pursuit of Helie. The narrative treats their elopement as a bold act of defiance and love, but it also culls the social transgression involved. The scandal was not confined to a single incident. It was part of a protracted period of Fulk Fitzwarren's rebellion against King John. Helie's decision to elope with him aligned her with a figure who was at various times an outlaw in the eyes of the English king. This placed her in a perilous position, sharing the dangers and uncertainties of her husband's life on the run. The consequences for Helie would have been immediate social censure. She would have lost her position at court and likely faced the disapproval of her family for her unconventional marriage. The lack of formal dowry negotiations would have also posed financial challenges. Despite these difficulties, the romance portrays their union as one of deep affection and loyalty. Ultimately, Fulk Fitzwarren and Helie of Saint-Saens eventually made peace with King John, albeit after years of conflict. Their elopement, however, remained a testament to their spirited defiance and a scandalous episode in the courtly life of medieval Brittany. It highlights how even the seemingly private choices of ladies-in-waiting could become public spectacles intertwined with the political struggles and social expectations of their time. The story of Helie's daring escape from Constance's court boozed the personal risks involved when love and loyalty clashed with the rigid conventions of medieval noble society. Number 6. Lady Margaret de Clare's affair with Piers Gaveston. The reign of Edward II in early 14th century, England was dominated by his intensely controversial relationship with Piers Gaveston. Gaveston, a Gascon knight, was the king's favorite, showered with titles, wealth, and unprecedented power. This favoritism enraged the English nobility, who viewed Gaveston as an arrogant upstart and a threat to their traditional influence. Amidst this tense atmosphere, the court of Queen Isabella of France, Edward II's young and often neglected wife, became a hotbed of intrigue and scandal. Lady Margaret de Clare was a prominent noblewoman serving as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Isabella. She came from a powerful family, the de Clares, who were among the wealthiest and most influential in England. Her position placed her at the heart of the royal court, intimately acquainted with both the king and the queen, and by extension with Gaveston himself. Piers Gaveston, despite his unpopularity with the magnates, possessed a mittig personality that evidently appealed to many, including, it seems, Lady Margaret de Clare. A scandalous affair developed between the king's powerful favorite and the queen's lady-in-waiting. Such a relationship was scandalous on multiple levels. It involved a married woman, a direct affront to social and religious norms. More critically, it involved a key figure in the royal household, a woman meant to serve the queen's honor, engaging in a liaison with the man who was widely seen as undermining the king's marriage and the stability of the kingdom. The affair would have been a tightly guarded secret at first, but courtly whispers were notoriously difficult to contain. The proximity of Lady Margaret to both the Queen and Gaveston would have made their interactions noticeable to keen observers. As the affair progressed, it added another layer of complexity and potential embarrassment to the already strained relationship between Edward II and Queen Isabella. Queen, already feeling marginalized by Gaveston's dominance over her husband, would have found any affair between her lady and Gaveston deeply insulting. The affair between Lady Margaret de Clare and Piers Gaveston was not a fleeting dalliance. It resulted in the birth of a daughter, Joan. The existence of an illegitimate child further amplified the scandal. Such a birth would have been difficult to conceal, especially given Gaveston's high profile. This child became living proof of their illicit relationship, a tangible affront to the societal norms of the time. Political situations surrounding Gaveston intensified, leading to repeated demands from the barons for his exile. He was exiled multiple times only to be recalled by the king. During these periods, the fate of Lady Margaret de Clare and their child would have been precarious. Their relationship was inextricably linked to Gaveston's rise and fall. The ultimate fate of Piers Gaveston was tragic. In 1312, after another recall by the king, he was captured by the infuriated barons and executed without trial. His death marked a significant turning point in Edward II's reign. For Lady Margaret de Clare, Gaveston's execution would have had profound consequences. She was left with their illegitimate daughter Joan, and the lasting social stigma of having been involved in such a high-profile and controversial affair. While she likely faced no official punishment due to her powerful family connections and the focus on Gaveston, her reputation would have been irrevocably stained. Her position at court, while perhaps not immediately lost, would have been compromised. The scandal of Lady Margaret de Clare and Piers Gaveston's affair was a microcosm of the larger chaos that defined Edward II's reign. It exposed the moral complexities of the court, the personal entanglements that could arise in such close quarters, and the severe repercussions of illicit relationships when intertwined with high politics. It was a story of forbidden love, social transgression, and the dangerous pursuit of power in medieval England. Number 5. Katherine Douglas, The Lass with the Lamp, and the Murder of James I. The Scottish court in the mid-15th century was a dangerous place, characterized by fierce rivalries among powerful noble families. King James I of Scotland, a strong but often ruthless ruler, had spent years as a captive in England before returning to assert his authority. His efforts to centralize power and curb the influence of the Scottish magnates created many enemies. His queen, Joan Beaufort, an English noblewoman, stood by his side, but the threats to their lives were ever present. Katherine Douglas was a maid of honor to Queen Joan Beaufort, a close attendant within the royal household. Her position placed her in the intimate circle of the queen, sharing the day-to-day life of the court and often being present in the private chambers of the royal family. On the night of February 20th, 1437, Katherine Douglas found herself at the heart of a terrifying and ultimately tragic scandal. King and Queen were staying at the Blackfriars Monastery in Perth. That evening, a group of disgruntled nobles, led by Sir Robert Graham and Walter Stewart, the Earl of Athol's grandson, launched a daring assassination plot against the king. They had discovered a weak point in the monastery's defenses, a drain leading from the king's private chambers to the outside, which could be used as an escape route. To prevent James I from fleeing, the conspirators had secretly removed the bar from the drain. As the assassins stormed the monastery, the alarm was raised. James I, realizing the gravity of the situation and the removed drain bar, looked for a way to secure the door to his chamber. The bolt had been removed possibly by a traitor within the household. In a moment of quick thinking and desperation, Katherine Douglas, showing immense courage, thrust her arm through the staples where the bolt should have been. She intended to hold the door shut, providing the king with precious moments to escape or find a weapon. Her act was an extraordinary display of loyalty and bravery. However, it was also a desperate and ultimately futile gesture. The assassins, determined and ruthless, crashed through the door. Katherine's arm, trapped in the staples, was brutally broken as the door burst open. She was severely injured in the violent onslaught, bearing witness to the horrific events that followed. The assassins poured into the room and brutally murdered James I, stabbing him multiple times. Queen Joan Beaufort, though injured herself, managed to survive the attack, hidden or protected by her remaining loyal attendants. Katherine Douglas, lying wounded, had been an eyewitness to the assassination, an event that shocked Scotland and sent tremors throughout European courts. The scandal surrounding the murder of James I was immense. It was a heinous act of regicide, a direct challenge to the monarchy, and a violent breach of trust. For Katherine Douglas, the lass with the lamp, as she became known, a later embellishment of the story, suggested she held a lamp or bar, but the core of her arm being broken. Holding the door is consistent. Her participation in this tragedy made her a permanent fixture in Scottish history. Her broken arm was a physical testament to the horrific night and her courageous, if ultimately failed, attempt to protect her king. While Katherine Douglas herself was not involved in any moral scandal, the events she endured and the trauma she suffered were part of a broader, shocking court scandal. The murder exposed the depths of aristocratic betrayal and the extreme violence that could erupt within the ostensibly safe confines of a royal residence. Her survival, bearing the physical scars of that night, would have served as a constant reminder of the brutal events. Her story became a legend of loyalty and sacrifice born out of a scandalous act of assassination that rocked the very foundations of the Scottish realm. Number 4. Frieda de Pany and the witchcraft accusations against Joan of Navarre. The early 15th century in England was a time of intense political and religious upheaval. King Henry V, a formidable monarch who was campaigning in France, pursuing his claim to the French throne. Back in England, his stepmother, Queen Joan of Navarre, the widow of Henry IV, held a position of considerable influence and wealth. Her foreign origins and the vast sums of money she controlled sometimes made her an object of suspicion, especially among those who resented her power. In 1419, these suspicions escalated into a grave and shocking scandal. Queen Joan was accused of witchcraft and attempting to kill the king. At the heart of this conspiracy, or fabricated plot, was Frieda de Pany, one of Queen Joan's trusted ladies-in-waiting. Frieda de Pany was an intimate member of the Queen's household, privy to her daily routines and personal confidences. Such a position meant that she was either a loyal confidant or, as alleged, a willing accomplice in dark deeds. The accusations against Queen Joan and Frieda de Pany were serious. They were charged with practicing witchcraft and sorcery, specifically with attempting to bring about the death of King Henry V. Witchcraft was a terrifying accusation in medieval Europe, often leading to trials, torture, and execution. The specifics of the charges against Frieda de Pany implicated her directly in the alleged magical rituals and poisonings. It was suggested that she was the intermediary, the one who sought out and conspired with practitioners of black magic on the Queen's behalf. True motivations behind these accusations are debated by historians. Some suggest it was a genuine fear of witchcraft, while others argue it was a politically motivated attack aimed at stripping Queen Joan of her wealth and influence. Whatever the underlying cause, the charges were taken with extreme seriousness by the Royal Council. Frieda de Pany, as a direct participant in the alleged acts, became a key figure in the unfolding drama. She was likely arrested and interrogated, possibly under duress. Her testimony, whether coerced or genuine, would have been crucial in building the case against the Queen. The records, such as the patent rolls, indicate that the investigation was thorough and that significant effort was made to gather evidence against the accused. The immediate consequence for both the Queen and Frieda de Pany was imprisonment. Queen Joan was placed under strict confinement at Leeds Castle and later at Pevensey Castle, effectively removed from public life and deprived of her vast revenues. Frieda de Pany, as her alleged accomplice, would have faced similar, if not harsher, detention. The scandal was public and widely reported, creating a climate of fear and suspicion around the Queen's household. The duration of Queen Joan's imprisonment lasted several years, until 1422, when she was eventually released, her name largely cleared by King Henry V on his deathbed, or his successor's council. Charges of witchcraft were ultimately dismissed or not fully proven, perhaps due to lack of concrete evidence. or a realization that the accusations were politically convenient. For Frieda de Pany, the scandal would have permanently marked her. Even if she was eventually released, her reputation as a lady-in-waiting would have been ruined. Her alleged involvement in witchcraft, regardless of the truth, would have made her an outcast in courtly society. Terrifying experience of being accused of such a grave crime and the subsequent imprisonment would have been a profound personal trauma. The witchcraft accusations against Queen Joan of Navarre and her lady-in-waiting, Frieda de Pany, reveal the darker side of medieval court politics. It shows how power struggles could manifest in chilling accusations of sorcery, and how the trusted members of a queen's household could become caught in deadly conspiracies. It remains a striking example of a personal relationship within the court, transforming into a major public scandal with devastating repercussions. Number 3. Agnes Sorel and her influence at Charles VII's court. The mid-15th century French court was a scene of political recovery after the devastating Hundred Years' War. Charles VII, the Victor Formini, was working to re-establish royal authority and bring stability to his realm. Alongside his Queen Marie of Anjou was a figure who would become one of the most famous and scandalous mistresses in French history. Agnes Sorel, while primarily known as the King's Mistress, Agnes Sorel also held an official position in the Queen's household, serving as a dame de compagnie or lady-in-waiting to Queen Marie. Agnes Sorel was renowned for her beauty, wit, and intelligence. Her arrival at court, initially serving as a lady to Queen Marie, quickly caught the attention of King Charles VII. Their relationship blossomed into an open and passionate affair, which in itself was a significant scandal for a medieval court. While royal mistresses were not unheard of, Agnes Sorel's influence and the public nature of her liaison with the king were unprecedented. What made the situation particularly scandalous was not just the infidelity, but the overt power and lavish lifestyle Agnes Sorel adopted. King showered her with gifts, titles, and immense wealth. She was granted the title of Dame de Boot, Lady of Beauty, and received numerous estates and revenues. Her extravagance was legendary. She wore furs, diamonds, and silks in a manner that often outshone the Queen herself. She was the first royal mistress in France to be publicly acknowledged and given such a prominent position even at the Queen's side. This blatant display of royal favor towards a mistress, especially one who was technically serving the Queen, caused considerable resentment among the nobility and the common people alike. Many viewed her as a drain on the royal treasury and a corrupting influence on the king. Chroniclers like Jean Chartier and Matthew Descouchy recorded the widespread disapproval of her ostentation and her perceived arrogance. The scandal was amplified by Agnes Sorel's direct involvement in political affairs. She did not remain a quiet, decorative figure. She reportedly advised the king on matters of state and even influenced appointments. Her involvement in such matters, traditionally the preserve of the king's council and powerful nobles, caused deep friction. Her influence was seen as an affront to traditional court structures and a challenge to the established order. The presence of Agnes Sorel in the Queen's household also created an awkward and potentially humiliating situation for Queen Marie of Anjou. To have the king's mistress visibly pregnant with his children, serving as one of her ladies-in-waiting, was a profound indignity. Queen, a pious and dignified woman, largely bore this public humiliation with grace, though the situation must have been deeply painful. Agnes Sorel bore Charles VII 4 daughters, publicly acknowledging their paternity. This further cemented her status and the public nature of the scandal. Her sudden death in 1450, possibly from mercury poisoning, though modern analysis suggests dysentery, only added to the mystique and speculation surrounding her life and influence. The scandal of Agnes Sorel was multifaceted. It was a story of a royal mistress breaking traditional boundaries, asserting unprecedented power and influence, and doing so while officially part of the Queen's household. Her beauty, her lavishness, and her perceived manipulation of the king generated both fascination and outrage. She redefined the role of a royal mistress, creating a precedent for future royal affairs to be more visible and politically potent. Her life and death remained a source of controversy and intrigue. A compelling narrative that captivated the French court and beyond. Number 2. Alice Perrers and her corruption at Edward III's court. The late 14th century saw the twilight of Edward III's long and glorious reign in England. Once a formidable warrior king, he had in his old age fallen under the considerable influence of his mistress, Alice Perrers. Alice Perrers began her career at court as a lady-in-waiting to Edward III's beloved Queen Philippa of Hainaut. This initial position gave her access to the royal family and the inner workings of the court, a proximity she would later exploit to an extraordinary degree. Upon Queen Philippa's death in 1369, Edward III was deeply saddened and increasingly frail. Alice Perrers seized this opportunity to cement her position, not just as the king's mistress, but as a dominant force in the royal administration. What followed was a period of rampant corruption and scandal that profoundly shook the English government. Alice Perrers amassed immense wealth through various illicit means. She openly sold royal pardons, manipulated court cases, and influenced appointments for personal gain. She became notoriously involved in legal affairs, using her influence over the aged king to sway judgments in her favor or for those who paid her. Chroniclers of the time, such as Thomas Walsingham, bitterly condemned her actions, describing her as a greedy and audacious woman who abused her position. Her influence was so great that she was often present at court hearings, even sitting beside the king, openly influencing his decisions. This was a direct affront to the proper functioning of justice and parliamentary procedure. The scandal was not just about the king's personal life. It was about the subversion of governance and the widespread perception of corruption at the highest levels of power. The nobility in Parliament, increasingly alarmed by her unchecked power and the perceived degradation of royal justice, finally decided to act. In 1376, during the Good Parliament, an unprecedented session called to address various grievances. Alice Perrers became a primary target. The Commons, supported by some powerful lords, presented a formal petition against her. The accusations were extensive. She was charged with maintenance, supporting lawsuits for financial gain, embracery, attempting to influence juries, and other forms of illicit enrichment. Parliament demanded her banishment from court and the confiscation of her vast wealth. This was a radical move, openly challenging the king's personal choice and a testament to the outrage she had provoked. Alice Perrers was initially banished and her properties seized. However, her influence over the king remained potent. She managed to return to court shortly after the Parliament was dissolved, much to the dismay of those who had sought her removal. Her ability to regain her position despite parliamentary condemnation was a further scandal, highlighting the king's declining authority and her powerful hold over him. Upon Edward III's death in 1377, Alice Perrers finally lost her royal protection. The new king, the young Richard II, and his Regency Council immediately moved against her. She was again brought before Parliament and tried for various offenses, including contempt of the parliamentary judgments against her. This time she faced a more permanent downfall. Her lands were confiscated, and she was exiled. The scandal of Alice Perrers was a defining feature of the last years of Edward III's reign. It exposed the vile benefits of an aging monarch and the dangers of unchecked favoritism. Her rise from a lady-in-waiting to a powerful corrupting force in the kingdom, and her dramatic downfall became a cautionary tale for future generations. Her story stands as a stark example of how a woman in the intimate circle of a queen could, through ambition and opportunity, become a central figure in a major political and moral scandal that shook an entire realm. Number 1. Lady Eleanor Talbot and the pre-contract with Edward IV. The late 15th century in England was defined by the Wars of the Roses, a brutal dynastic struggle for the throne. The House of York, led by the mighty Edward IV, had wrested the crown from the Lancastrians. Edward's reign, though militarily successful, was plagued by controversy, most notably concerning his marriage. At the heart of one of the most explosive scandals of the era was Lady Eleanor Talbot, also known as Eleanor Butler, a lady who served in the household of Cecily Neville, Duchess of York, Edward IV's own mother. Lady Eleanor Talbot was the daughter of John Talbot, 1st Earl of Shrewsbury, a prominent nobleman. Her social standing placed her within the elite circles of the English aristocracy. After her husband, Sir Thomas Butler, died in 1461, she became a widow. It was during this period that her life became entangled with King Edward IV. King Edward IV, known for his personal charm and striking appearance, was also famed for his numerous romantic dalliances before his surprising and unannounced marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. In 1464, it was alleged that he had entered into a pre-contract of marriage with Lady Eleanor Talbot. Pre-contract, or spousals de praesenti, was a solemn promise between two individuals to marry, spoken in the present tense, which under canon law was considered as binding as a marriage performed in church. It was seen as making any subsequent marriage bigamous and therefore invalid. The circumstances of this alleged pre-contract are shrouded in secrecy and later political manipulation. It is suggested that Edward, perhaps seeking to seduce Lady Eleanor or genuinely intending to marry her, made this solemn promise to her. The promise might have been witnessed by a cleric or close confidant. As a lady-in-waiting to his mother, Lady Eleanor would have been in close proximity to the young king, creating opportunities for such a secret vow. The scandal exploded years later, long after Edward IV had married Elizabeth Woodville and fathered several children, including the princes, in the Tower. Upon Edward IV's death in 1483, his brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, later Richard III, Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid because of the prior pre-contract with Lady Eleanor Talbot. This claim, if true, meant that all of Edward IV's children with Elizabeth Woodville were illegitimate, making Richard the rightful heir to the throne. The legal justification for Richard III's usurpation was enshrined in the Parliamentary Act known as Titulus Regius, passed in 1484. This act explicitly stated that Edward IV had been enticed into a pre-contract with Eleanor Talbot, who was a woman of great honor and good reputation. The document claimed that a bishop, Robert Stillington, had witnessed this pre-contract, and that Eleanor had died before Edward's subsequent marriage. The revelation of this pre-contract created an immense scandal, not just for the deceased king and his queen, but also for Lady Eleanor Talbot herself, even though she was by then deceased. Her reputation, though described as good in Titulus Regius, became inextricably linked to the legitimacy crisis of the English throne. She was portrayed as the woman who, however unwittingly, rendered the Yorkist succession void. Historians continue to debate the veracity of the pre-contract. Was it a genuine vow or a fabrication by Richard III to justify his usurpation? Whatever the truth, the claim itself was potent enough to dismantle the existing royal line. Lady Eleanor Talbot, who lived a life that was likely largely private, became a posthumous figure in one of the most significant and dramatic political maneuvers in English history. The scandal highlighted the precarious nature of royal marriages and the power of canon law in medieval society. It demonstrated how a personal relationship, however secret, could have devastating political repercussions, leading to the disinheritance of children and the overthrow of a dynasty. Lady Eleanor Talbot, as the woman at the center of this alleged pre-contract, remains an enigmatic figure whose life, even in death, became central to a scandal that reshaped the course of English history.